you probably get a little box that says OK or something that it's going to be recorded, which you need to tick, otherwise you have to leave the meeting. And interestingly, there's no video on my screen for the recording, so OK. Right, let's make a start. Thanks very much everyone for joining us tonight for this talk on wildlife recording. I'm Ben Mullen and I work for the Local Environmental Record Centre for Powys and the Brecon Beacons National Park area, usually referred to ourselves as BIS, B-I-S. And on that title slide, you can see the 4 stages of recording across the top there in the photos. So there on the left is a butterfly that you might have seen. You think, oh, I'll record that. You might not know what it is, so you consult a book or a website or something. And then you make a record of it. Here's a couple of people adding it to the Lurk Wales app, which I'll mention. And then we get that data, get that record and turn it into data. And then we can do things with it, including mapping where records have been made. And here's a little snip of Bryn Arw. And the red dots are records. I can't remember what they're records of now. But each dot is a square is a record of a particular species. So we'll cover all those kind of 4 topics, and then I'll go into a little bit more detail about the surveying that Stump Up for Trees are going to be doing as well. So all about BIS, there's a map of Powys and Brecon Beacons National Park area, which is the area that BIS covers. And we collate wildlife records and protected sites information for this area. And then we put that information into our database and can do various things with it and make it usable for people who need to know what wildlife lives there, or what wildlife lives where, or where there are protected sites such as nature reserves or sites of special scientific interest, for example. It's also used for writing management plans. If you know what lives where, you can write your management plan to suit the species that are there. And also it's used for research, so tracking change over time, for example. Then we also provide that information to the local planning authorities, Powys County Council and the Brecon Beacons National Park, so that wildlife information can be taken into account when making decisions. And we also support a network of wildlife recorders, and we promote wildlife recording, encouraging new people to become wildlife recorders and join the wildlife recording community. And anyone can record wildlife as long as you know what it is that you're recording. So you don't have to be an expert or a specialist or anything like that, but we do have quite a lot of specialists in our area, which is great because they're good people to go to for advice and help. And we're actually one of 4 local environmental record centres in Wales. You can see us there in mid Wales. We don't have any coastline, so we're kind of lacking in marine records that the other 3 in North Wales, West Wales and South East Wales have. But yeah, we do cover a large area. As you know, Powys is very long from top to bottom. And there is a leaflet available that I put together just to briefly summarise what we do at BIS and how to get involved. And you can find that on our website. So here are some wildlife records. We'd start with some records just to show you what a wildlife record is, or a biological record, you sometimes hear it referred to. And these are some that I found that we have in our database for Bryn Arw. And I just picked a couple of species there, the wall butterfly and the minotaur beetle as well, which is one that I saw, as you can see there on the top right. I recorded that on an event that I was involved in on Bryn Arw in November last year. And you can see for both of those, there's fairly recent records from last year, and also ones from 20 plus years ago. And they're the only records for those species that we have on Bryn Arw. So we know in 1987, the wall butterfly was recorded. it's actually listed there twice because we do have some records in our database twice. We call them duplicates, and we do have systems to remove those, but they don't always come to fruition or come to work. So that's only one record really, but it's down twice. So in 1987, we know that wall butterfly was inhabiting Brinaru, but for the next 20, 30 years, we didn't know if wall butterflies were there because no one had recorded them. So it's good to kind of continue making records over time, because I say, just a bit like IT, as soon as you made a wildlife record, it's going out of date. So as soon as you bought IT, it's going out of date. So always good to make regular records of several species. And again, similarly with the Minotaur beetle as well. And you can see some of the information that we need to make a wildlife record, which we'll come on to later as well. And all those records end up in our wildlife recording database, which is called Aderyn, which is Welsh for bird, and that comes from the fact that it's the Biodiversity Information Reporting Database. So it's kind of a link there to Welsh from the name of the shortened name of what Aderyn is. And that's used by all the local environmental record centres in Wales. So all four of us share our information with each other, which is really helpful for people such as ecological consultants who want to access that data. They don't have to go to each one if their site and the boundary of data that they want information for crosses into another local environmental record centre area. So it's kind of a unique and, I suppose, advanced system we have, and say Scotland are looking at it as well to try and copy what we do here in Wales. So it's really, really good that we work collaboratively together. And there are a couple of tools that anyone can use on Aderyn. One is called the What's in My Area tool, and if you use that, you can see a list of all the non-sensitive species records, so only the records, so any records that have been made in every 1 kilometre by 1 kilometre square across Wales. So it gives you a little bit of an idea of what lives where you live, or where you work, or where you're visiting, so you might know what to look out for. And it's also useful if you do look where you live, for example, and you say, oh, there's no birds, but obviously there probably are birds living there, so maybe you can help add to the database of wildlife records by seeing what isn't recorded. And there's also a distribution map tool as well, where you can create a record density map, which is an all Wales map with coloured squares depending on how many records we have for each 10 kilometre area. In that example there, that's for pine martins. And you can see where pine marten have been recorded across Wales. And the darker the colour, I think, is the more records that we have. And so a couple of tools there, you can play around with the information that's in Aderyn. So here are all the records that we hold for Brinaru. Well, all the places that we have records. You see some of the numbers there have 24, 27, which means we've got 27 records for that particular point. And I'd like to introduce the subject of verification. If you make a wildlife record and you've put enough information on it that people who are specialists or verifiers can make a judgment and say, yes, you've definitely seen that peacock butterfly, for example, in the example that I gave, then they can verify that record and say, yes, you definitely saw this species because you provided a photograph or a really good description or something like that. And then that record then becomes considered correct. So it has more value. It's a kind of gives it an added value. So these are all records that we hold in Aderyn for Brinaru and around. And these are all the records that have been verified as considered correct. So you can see there's quite a lot less that have kind of got that extra tick because a photograph has been provided, for example, or a description, or maybe these records have been made by the specialist or the verifier themselves. So quite a bit of difference, and it doesn't mean to say that these records aren't any good or unusable. It just means that they're unassessed, as we call it. So still good to make a record, but the more information you can provide, then the more likely it is to become a verified record or considered correct. So just to give some examples of what we can do with the data, here are some records of red kites. So this is pre-1990, so going back before the release program, I think. And this is sightings of red kite, or where people have made records of red kite in the Brecon Beacons National Park. So this is pre-1990. And then, of course, we had the release program in Wales, and there's a lot more records of red kite. So each one of these dots is one particular record. So it could be that it's one bird that's been recorded several times. It doesn't mean to say that from the top map there's 30 birds and now there's 200. It just means that we have more records over a much wider area, you'll notice as well, since 1990, because there are, you can probably surmise there are more red kites living in Wales now. And this is the sort of information that we can tell from people who make wildlife recordings and submit them to us, and then this is the sort of thing we can do. So you can see trends over time. And this is actually one of the species that's kind of bucking the trend of all the doom and gloom we hear in the biodiversity crisis, where lots of species have decreased in numbers and range as well. You see from this little snippet from the State of Nature report a few years ago, there's a lot more that have decreased in population numbers than have increased, but the red kite will definitely be in that green 26%. And this kind of stats in this green box, the State of Nature report, is using wildlife records over time as well to see how population numbers records have changed. So what is biological recording? It's quite a hard thing to kind of describe, so I kind of put a few definitions here. So it's a scientific study of the distribution of living organisms. That's in terms of are they there or not, how many are there, their associations with land use, for example, and any changes over time, and areas that they are covered, that they'd be living in, recorded in. And that all this is made up of biological records. So an individual record is a record of a species, so a peacock butterfly in a known location, maybe Brinaru by a known person, whoever's recorded it on a known date. We'll come back to those and 4 pieces of information shortly. So biological recording is basically the process of making biological records, and you can use that information to show change. So it's really easy now to make wildlife records and put it on the map. The Look Wales app is fairly new, and it's part of the iRecord family of apps, and it makes it really easy to put the 4 pieces of information that we need to make a biological record. So basically the who, what, where and when. So who made the record, the recorder, what was seen, what species, where it was seen, which is ideally 2 pieces of information. So it is 4, but really it's 5, because the where is great to give a grid reference and also a location name. So that could just be the nearest town. So for Brinaru, you might put Brinaru, you might put Bettis, you might put Abergavenny. It's just so when we're looking at all these records that we put in our database, we just cross-reference to make sure that the grid reference is where it is supposed to be, which the apps do for you now using the phone GPS. So we get less errors with that now. And then the when, so the date. So it's the who, what, where and when are the 4 pieces of information. And of course, LERC Wales, LERC stands for Local Environmental Record Centre, of which there are 4 in Wales. And it's led to a new term that this lady, Sylvia, who works for Radnorshire Wildlife Trust, came up with. And she describes it as lurking. So you'll be driving along with her and she'll say, oh, there's a robin, have you lurked it? So kind of come up with a new verb there. So we've got a new language with the app, Wales. And there's loads of places to get help. books are kind of the old school method, I guess, with loads and loads of websites via social media. So yeah, loads of places. And of course, we've got quite a lot of experts as well who are contactable by email. You can email photos and things like that and get identifications, which enables you to record things that you don't know what they are, and also maybe to learn, so next time you see something, you'll know what it is. And that's Phil Ward, who also works for Radnor Wildlife Trust, and he's an expert entomologist. So if you show him a beetle or a fly, he'll probably know what it is. So why do we record wildlife? And this is kind of on a personal level, I suppose. It's fun and it adds interest. If you're going out for a walk, something that you can do, and it makes you more aware of what's around you as well, because you're looking out for things. And I suppose it can give you a connection with nature as well, because you become more aware of what's living in your local area, on your local walk, or in your garden, for example. And as I say, it improves your skills if you're finding out, being able to identify new things, new species, new animals, new plants, then improving your skill level. This one came from somebody, which I'll ask a similar question at the end for more why record wildlife suggestions, and they felt it gave them a mental health benefit because they felt they were connecting with nature. And after the lockdowns of recent years, of course, we all kind of now appreciate our connection with nature is good for our health and well-being. And you can help nature and conservation by joining the wildlife recording community and making records. All that information is really useful on knowing what lives where and what's happening to all our species. And as we've seen, old records are great, but it's good to keep making new ones so we've got accurate and up-to-date information. And then if we've got lots of records over time, we can see trends as well. And anyone can be a recorder. As I said earlier, you don't need to be an expert or a specialist. You just have to know what it is that you're recording, and then have that desire, I suppose, to record it and share that information with other people and enable us to put that in our database and make use of it. So this is again why I record wildlife, and this is the uses of wildlife records. And as I say, it's good to know what lives where so that we can protect it. If you're managing a nature reserve or you're a landowner, if you know what is living on your site, on your nature reserve, then you can take measures to actually protect it and enhance the habitats that it's living in, for example. So it helps with conservation of that species. As we've seen, records over time enable us to see any changes in population levels and distribution. So records over time and monitoring, which is what you guys, I think, are going to get involved in. So you're doing regular surveys, say once a year or every season. Those are really, really useful piece of information because you're kind of using the same methods, using the same standards or similar standards over time on similar dates, and that's really, really useful information. And then all this provides evidence for conservation action. I'm just going to admit Virginia, so I'm hoping it's not going to mess up my presentation. Hi, Virginia. I'm not sure if Virginia is muted, but anyway. So yes, evidence for conservation action, which we can glean from these wildlife records. And we also provide the planning departments of Powys County Council and Brecon Beacons National Park with wildlife and important sites information as well as for when they're making, so they can take that into account when they're making their planning decisions. And maybe they'll decline for a rare species, or there'll be mitigation measures needed by the developer, for example. And we've got a really nice picture of a curlew there, which has come from one of our local bird recorders. He's also great with his camera. And I've put that in, one, because curlews are really declining at the moment, and there's a need for more action to hopefully stop them becoming extinct. And the Welsh Government have set up, I think it's 9 or 12, I can't remember, important curlew areas over the whole of Wales and the borders over into England, because species don't stop at the border, of course. And you can help if you do see or hear a curlew by making a record, and really this year trying to get a really good understanding of where curlew are, and especially where they're breeding as well. So we've got an idea of how many breeding pairs there are. And there is action being taken to protect nests and things like that. And this graph on the bottom shows some of the things that we can do with that wildlife recording information that we receive. You can see the dots on the red line there, kind of species numbers, so the counts. And then I think the lines, I didn't put any annotation on it, the lines are kind of distribution as well, so the area over which those records have been seen, or something like that, I can't quite remember. So you can see from the 70s, there's been a stark decline in curlew numbers, and also the number of places they're found, the distribution of them. And I went to a talk on this recently, and it seems to be linked with the change from hay to silage. So hay meadows are generally cut later on in the summer, so the chicks laid their eggs, the chicks have been raised and they've gone off, whereas now it's cut for silage. Of course, that's cut during the curlew nesting season. So these birds are not picking the right places to nest now, and because they're changing habitat use and how that land is managed. So the important curlew areas are working with these landowners and farmers to try and address that and put in mitigation. So that's just some of the ways that wildlife records can be used to benefit. I'm just going to check the chat. All right, yeah. I can't see anybody, I can't even see myself, so I'm just hoping that I am broadcasting to you all and you're all watching intently. So I hope you're enjoying it so far. And a lot of our records are used for research. We often get requests from university students who are working on a project for wildlife records and information, which we're happy to provide for science purposes. Some of these are looking into the impacts of climate change. And this graph on the right sort of shows the north and also westwards as well. We know shift of the species range across lots and lots of taxon groups. So a lot more things, because the climate's getting warmer, moving further north and further west. And not sure why the herptiles, the sort of snakes, aren't doing so well. There's obviously something that they don't like about a warming climate, which is interesting. So I've not really come to any conclusions or found any information yet. So I need to look into that as to why the snakes aren't doing as well as a lot of other species, or they're not moving north as the weather warms as we'd expect. I suspect it might be due to lack of habitat and habitat connectivity. So they can't actually move with the changing climate because there isn't a habitat there, and linking habitat to get them to those new places where they might expand their range. So species range, contraction and expansion. Of course, we saw with the curlew how the range and the numbers of them are contracting, whereas with the red kite, we saw the records expanding over new areas and also in number as well. So that's how we can use some of these records, and also into land use change, which is kind of starting to become known now with the curlew decline as well, change from hay meadows to silage. So let's have a look at making wildlife records, and here's the 4 pieces of information that we need. And the who is basically you. If you're make a wildlife record, that's who you are, the recorder's name. And it's good to use your real name. We do get quite a few trendy names or shortened names that are okay, but they're not that useful, and that's because of this verification process. And if an expert or a verifier knows who you are, and they know, say I make a record of a butterfly, the local butterfly recorder knows that I know my butterflies fairly well, so it's likely to give that one a tick to verify it. Whereas if I'd use some trendy name that he'd never heard of, then he probably wouldn't know that it's me. So that's one good reason to use your real name. And also that record actually remains your property. I don't know if you know much about intellectual property rights, but it's still your record, and you kind of give us permission to use it and share it and do things with it when you make a record. So that's why we need the who made the record. And of course, we need to know what you're recording. And this can be the species, scientific name, or the common name. Doesn't matter, as long as we know what it is, that's fine. Sometimes you're not quite sure what it is you're recording, so you might go kind of a level up and not commit to a species name, but just keep it at genus. So here's a common frog. There are other species of frogs not really seen in our area very often, but you might not know that, so you might just record this as a frog, or rana in the scientific, which is the genus, and then common frog would be genus, and the species, which I can't remember off the top of my head now what it is, but it's fine to use common names. And you just got to be careful as well with some common names, because they're used for this for different things. And I think I'll give an example later of peacock, which probably is going to be a butterfly, but of course it's also a bird as well. And the horse chestnut is also the name of a moth, as well as the tree that we're probably more familiar with. I think it's the name of something else, but I can't remember what that is. And when you're saying what it is you've seen, it's also useful if you can provide extra information, such as abundance, how many you've seen, or if it was a plant, how many you think there were, or was it widespread, that kind of thing. Whether it was male, female, whether it was an adult or a larva, like a caterpillar, or an egg, for example. And now with the apps and the online recording, it's really, really easy to include a photo. So here is a photo of a common frog that went into the record when they submitted it, the app or online. And then if there is a verifier, because there isn't always a verifier for every range of species or group of species, they would see that photo and be able to say, yeah, that's definitely a common frog. So photos are kind of the new way that we're able to get more verified records and make it really easy for our experts, verifiers, to see what it is you're recording is actually what it is you've said. So photos are really good if you can get them, of course. A lot of species, especially insects, don't always hang around, and photos are often blurry. So it doesn't have to be perfect quality. I've had a bird record verified by a local bird recorder from a really blurry picture, and the bird probably made up about 5 pixels on the image, but it was enough for the recorder, the verifier, to say, yeah, that's definitely a little egret, I think it was, just from the habitat where it was as well. So where things are seen is really useful information as well. And of course the where, so yes, where things are seen, we need to know that, but this section is more on the location of it in terms of accuracy. So the grid reference is great. The more accurate, the more definition you can give, then that's better. So if you can record something to 8-figure grid reference, which is 10 by 10 meter square, that's really good. And we can always work backwards and turn it into a 1 kilometer 4-figure grid reference. But of course, if you only record it at 4 figures, 1 kilometer, we can't pinpoint it any more than that. So if you can, and the apps make this really good, as long as they've got good GPS signal for locating your records really accurately. And as I say, it's also good just to provide a name. It doesn't have to be a local house or a farm or anything like that. It can just be a town, nearest town, just to make sure that when we cross-reference those grid reference, it is where you say it is. And the apps, of course, do it for you, so they make that really easy. We do have quite a lot of records of species in the middle of the Irish Sea or somewhere over in the east of England, and that's just where a letter, 2 prefix letter, the grid reference, have been put in incorrectly or mixed up, or some of the numbers have been swapped round. So having a location name enables us to, a little bit like detectives, work out where that record should be, considering the location name. You know, we probably see that, oh yeah, they put SO rather than SM or something like that. So yeah, 2 bits of information for where it is really useful. And then of course there's the when as well. So when you saw this species, again, the apps do this for you. Complete date is preferential, so day, month, year, but we have a lot of records where we just know it was seen in January, because you might chat to somebody and they say, oh yes, I saw an adder back in July last year, which happened on an event that I did on Brinaru, and we were able to make a record of that. We don't need to know the exact date. Some of our records are years as well, so as long as we've got some kind of date, that's fine, and the more accurate the date, the better, as with the grid reference location. So on the left there, you can see Joe Milborough, who's our data officer, has recorded this common frog at the grid reference there, SO157, so that's 100 by 100 meters square, which is kind of the minimum that we like to have a record at. Sometimes you can't get it to that accuracy, but more accurate, better. And given a place name as well in Langunada by the side of the road. So that's a really good record, and that'll be in our database. And the photo as well enables the verifier to kind of give it a tick, so it becomes a considered correct record. So what should you record? We do say record everything, but that's not quite true. We only really want records of wildlife, so wild species. So maybe not these grazing ponies on a nature reserve here. I think they're Exmoor ponies. We don't really want to know that there's grazing ponies, because they're kind of not there naturally, if you like. So it's things that are wild, so things that are there by their own accord, not introduced by humans, for example. So this robin here, definitely record that. And most people can identify a robin, so you should only really record things that you can identify. So you have to find out what it is if you're not sure, or don't record it. Or record it at a level, you know, you could record this robin as bird. Not very useful, but at least you're recording it and getting it to an accuracy that you know it as. You don't actually have to see things to record them. So this robin, you might hear it singing. You can make a record of it. Maybe in the comments you put heard singing, heard calling, that kind of thing. So it's not all about wildlife sightings, it's wildlife hearings, if you like. And on the top left here, we've got a fox scat. So yeah, you can use poo to make records. There's not a fox there now, but you know there was one here at some point recently. And again, you take a photo, attach it to the record, or add to the comment that you saw a fox scat. And of course, that's one of the ways that mammals are recorded, because you don't often see mammals, because they're quite elusive. A lot of them are nocturnal. So droppings, scats, poos, whatever. Molehills are good ways of recording some species. And it's good to record the common things as well. They kind of often get overlooked because they're always there, especially trees. People don't record trees that often because, you know, they're going to be there for another 100 years. But if they see a rare bird fly over, they're more likely to want to make a record of it. It's a bit more exciting, I suppose. You don't see it all the time, but records can get skewed a little bit if more rare species are recorded than the common ones. One example was that we did a few years ago was the hare and rabbit, and lots more hares were recorded because it's a little bit more of an exciting sight. So if you looked at the data, you think, oh, there's more hares than rabbits, which might be true in times of myxomatosis, but I think generally we probably all agree that there's probably more rabbits than there are brown hares, but they weren't being recorded as regularly. So yeah, do record the common stuff as well. And just a few things there not to record, like ponies that are grazing. Humans, you can use the apps and online to record Homo sapien if you want, but we don't really want to know where humans are living. And in your garden as well, wild plants, so things that might have started growing there naturally, for example, dandelions, things that you haven't planted, we welcome records of, but garden plants, not so interested in because you kind of introduced them. But I always think that does raise a question, if you planted a native hedge, when do you kind of start recording it? So something like that, you might put planted hedge in your comment or something like that, so it gives an indication of why that species is growing there. And as I mentioned, things you can't identify, you shouldn't record them, but try and find out what it is using all the help that's available. So here's Joe, our data officer. I'm going to rest my voice for a couple of minutes, and here's Joe showing you some of the things that you can record if you're just out for a walk. Now the sound should come on. If you can't hear it, can somebody post in the chat and just let me know that you can't hear the video?
I'm going to give you a few examples of 3 different things I could record out on my dog walk this morning. So behind me you should be able to see some molehills, so they're a really good thing to record as tracks and signs, and it's definite evidence of mole. So I'm just going to add my mole record here, and I can add a photo. I've taken a nice photo of those molehills and give it a name. And upload it. So also while standing here, I can hear quite a bit. You might not be able to pick it up on the video. I can hear a wren, I can hear a robin, I can hear a song thrush. So I'm going to make records for all those as well, because they're valid records, because I can identify them from their song. And then also there's quite a few things I can see. So over on this side of the path I've got a hazel tree, so I'm going to make a record of that as well. So you can see quite a few different sorts of records I could make just standing here out on a morning dog walk.
So just a few things there that you can record when you're out and about. Nothing too exciting, but all very welcome records. So as we say, nothing is too common to record, and they often get overlooked and not recorded. And it is one reason why it is useful to record the common things is maybe 30 years ago, hedgehogs were really common. Maybe they didn't get recorded because you saw them all the time. And of course, now we know that they're in decline, hopefully recovering a little bit now. So things that are common now might not be in the future, and knowing that by the decline in records, if that happens, is useful. So do record the common things. And just to give you an example, you've probably all got these in your garden or seen them in your garden or out and about. The garden snail, common garden snail, the one with the really big shell. It's kind of that big, finger and thumb together, and that's the kind of size of the shell of the common garden snail. Yeah, thumbs up. I can't see any thumbs. So you've probably all seen that, but have you recorded it? Maybe not. And here's a distribution map from the records that we do have from those people who have recorded common snail. And this is an all Wales map of where records have been made. So the different colours will be how many records there are in that 1 kilometre square. And this map's also interesting because recorder effort and population levels also dictate the density mapping. In this case, in southeast Wales, there seems to be a lot more garden snails, but that's because there's a lot more people recording them, so that can skew the results as well. So if you look at that, not many garden snails living in mid Wales. And if you compare that to red kites, a bit more of an exciting species, and this is the distribution of red kites in Powys and Brecon Beacons National Park area. So from the data, from the records, you might say, oh, there's loads more red kites than there are garden snails, but we kind of know that there probably aren't, but just shows you how recording effort can kind of skew results. So do record garden snails. And here's Joe again with some other things that you might record in your garden, and also some things that you shouldn't record.
So I'm in my garden now, and I just thought I'd show you a few of the things that you can record in your garden. So the first thing, I've just come across a really nice snail shell underneath some plants. So this is garden snail. It's a easy one to identify. So I can take a photo of that, attach it to my record using the app, and submit that. That's a valid record, that's great. I also found another little snail shell, little tiny one. And now I'm not too sure on the identification of this one, so I'm going to take that inside and have a look at some ID resources, see if I can get a definite ID on that one, and if so, I can make a record of that one. And behind me there's some bird feeders, and we often get asked about making records for birds from bird feeders, because obviously they're there every day, that there's food out there, and I'm not going to stand here all day long making records. I might take part in a survey, but that's a separate thing. So I would make records of the birds on my bird feeders every month or two. I'll just sit and record the different species that are visiting. And the last thing I wanted to show you in a garden is having a think about the plants, because obviously quite a few plants and gardens are planted. We don't want records of those. So down here I've got this little plant is ivy-leaved toadflax, and that's a wild plant that's just occurring here naturally. That's not been planted by me or anybody else, so I can make a record of that one. Whereas here, also coming out of the wall, this is a garden plant. This is Rose of Sharon, so that's been planted by somebody. I'm not going to make a record of that one because it's a garden plant. So that's a few ideas of things that you might want to record in your garden.
So yeah, thanks to Joe for that. And of course, the empty shell of the garden snail, that's evidence of garden snail, even though it's not alive. So you can record dead things. And that's actually how a lot of mammal records are received, because obviously they often are casualties on roads, and yeah, not the best things. And we do get photographs of dead things, but it enables them to be verified, and they are useful. And yeah, it's a shame, but it is useful information. So yeah, any squashed hedgehogs, do make a record of them. And so let's look at things what to record with Joe, and also now let's look at where you should record. So basically, record everything, maybe not domestic species, and record everywhere. So there's nowhere that you shouldn't make a record, other than land where you haven't got permission to go onto. So public land, you can make records. Private land, you should get the landowner's permission. So just to give you some examples, if you're not a wildlife recorder, maybe you start in your garden. Of course, not the garden plants that you put in the ground yourself. Around town, if you live in the city, in a park that you do a regular walk on a dog walk. If you visit a nature reserve, you can help by making records there. Not so much now because we're all working at home, but if you're commuting, you can make records, adds a bit of interest to your journey maybe. And also, I used to do a campaign, and do occasionally now, of under-recorded areas. So there's certain areas in our patch, Powys and Brecon Beacons National Park, where we don't have any wildlife records. So this map on the left of the national park shows 6 red 1 kilometre by 1 kilometre squares. And when this was printed a few months ago, there were no wildlife records in there. There's obviously things living there. Maybe there's no records because nobody's visited, or nobody has thought to record there, or there probably isn't very much living in some of them because they're all quite remote, maybe hilltops, that kind of thing. But yeah, there are places where we don't have any wildlife records. And mostly they're all fairly inaccessible patches of land. So there's a map on our website of all the different 1 kilometre squares. I think there's 101 at the moment where we don't have any wildlife records. Some people have started making more use of camera traps now to see the wildlife in their garden or local area, especially great for seeing things at night when we're all in bed asleep. So especially mammals and birds as well, you can record usually in the dawn and during the day. But I think they're probably the only two taxon groups that you would be able to identify from camera trap footage. Just a little note on, if you are putting one out and making records from your captures, then use the date obviously that comes with the image or the video. And if you have taken a photo with your camera or you've set it to video, then what I do is download it onto the computer and then freeze it at a suitable point to capture the hedgehog or a small mouse or something like that. You can take a snip or a screenshot and then use that to add to your record. And our local in Breconshire mammal recorder is really good at being able to identify mammals, especially small mammals like mice, just by how they're moving as well. So a video clip to him is really useful. You can't actually add videos to the record, just a photo. So we can take a snip, that's really good. And if you do want an idea of a mouse, then it's worth getting in touch, and I can put you in touch with Phil, who's a mammal recorder, and he can maybe swap contact details with you and you can send them the video. There's also a website by the Mammal Society, I think it is, called Mammal Web, and we've got a project listed on there, and that's a place where you can upload your captures, and then people who look at that and look through, everybody around the country who's got a project, look at all the footage on there and give identification pointers and say what it is. So you might get 10 people saying it's a rabbit, and then one saying it's a hare. So you can probably be pretty sure that it's a rabbit, for example, that you've got in your picture. So that's really useful as well. It makes it easy for the recorder if you've got lots of footage and you haven't got the time to go through it. That's one way of getting help, is your local counter recorders, we call them, local experts. But there's loads and loads of books and guides. There's loads of new books coming out all the time on identification, making it easy as possible. If you go onto social media, if you're on Facebook, there's loads of groups, loads of Facebook groups, such as this one here, the Beetles of Britain and Ireland, where you can join and post pictures, photos of beetles that you've seen, and there'll be someone on there who'll give you an identification or a suggestion of what it is that you've seen, and I've used that a few times. We've also got one for our area now, which is the Powys Brecon Beacons Wildlife Recording Group. That's a private group on Facebook. Anyone can join, just got to accept the rules, that kind of thing. And I think we're up to 96 members now. And that's the place to share photos and get identification advice and help and that kind of thing. So if you are on Facebook, have a look at that. And Twitter as well, not so useful, but there are people on Twitter that will see your photos and be able to offer ID help as well. Loads of websites and apps for identifying out there as well. So here's the butterfly that we saw right at the start. And if you go onto the Butterfly Conservation website, there's an Identify a Butterfly page. And you can go through that and match up what you've seen. There's lots of apps out there like iSpot and iNaturalist as well, where you can post images and people will get back to you. And there's lots of recognition sort of web apps now where they'll use the image that you post to give you kind of automatic identification just from the features of the photo rather than the human being involved. So kind of using artificial intelligence, and those are getting better, but I'm always wary of those kind of suggestions, and it's best to take what's been told to you and then double check it yourself just to be sure. So yeah, I've mentioned Phil, the mammal recorder. You can find a list of all our experts, as we call them, on our website in the Find an Expert section. And there's an email link to get in touch with those, or you can email me and I'll put you in touch. And this talk will go onto YouTube, and we've got lots and lots of different videos on YouTube on wildlife recording and also identification of various species as well. So if you look for Biodiversity Information Service on YouTube, you'll find us. So let's look at actually recording the wildlife. We've seen the app in use there, which is really, really easy to use once you've got used to it. There's also online recording sites if you're not a smartphone user or you prefer not to do it on a small screen. So for online recording, you can use iRecord, or we've got a local one for Powys and Brecon Beacons National Park called is Wired, Wildlife Recording Database. You can register for those and add your records online in the same way as an app, but it doesn't do as much automatic recognition of where you are and that kind of thing, the dates. You've got to put that in manually. But the online sites are the place to see any records that you've uploaded. So once you've made a record on your phone, for example, on an app, and submitted it to us, you can't really do anything with it. So you need to log on online if you want to kind of see a list of all the records that you've made. And it's also the place where you can edit any uploaded or submitted records from the app as well. If you've decided that it's something else to what you recorded it as, you can change the name, but you can only do that online. If you're making a lot of records, which I suspect that you will be doing, spreadsheets are great. You can add a lot of things to one spreadsheet really quickly. And they're really useful for when you are doing surveys or transects, such as you're going to be doing. And of course, you've got your own survey sheets which have been produced, and we'll have a look at those in a minute. And they're really, really good. So it doesn't have to be online or with an app with a photo. It can be a spreadsheet of records. Some people still email us records, which is great for occasional sightings. If you're not a regular recorder, you don't really want to get involved, but you found something exciting, we can add that for you, as long as we know the who, what, where, and when. And on our website, there's also a recording form for a single sighting where you don't actually have to register or anything like that, create an account. You can just do a single sighting, or you can send your records to the experts. So if you make a spreadsheet, you can send it to the local county recorder, and they can collate a lot of records that they've received or made themselves and submit them to us maybe once or twice a year. So slightly slower process of getting the record to us, but it does enable them to see that record and make a judgment as to whether they can verify it or not. So we've seen the Lurk Wales app, which we developed a few years ago. It is part of the iRecord family of apps. So iRecord, Lurk Wales app, pretty much the same software, and it goes to the same place. And this enables you to record on the go in Wales. So if you use iRecord now, carry on using it. But if you want to start recording, maybe have a look at the Lurk Wales app. And I'm just going to show myself here a year or so ago, adding a record really, really quickly, just to show you how easy it is to use.
I'm here in my local churchyard, and I'm going to show you how quick and easy it is to add a biological record using the Lurk Wales app. I'm going to record this yew tree which is growing in the churchyard behind me. Here's the Lurk Wales app home screen. To add a new biological record, click on the green plus symbol, type in the name of the species you want to record, in this case a yew. The drop down list will appear, select the one that you want, yew, conifer, tap on that. Your phone will then add that record to the Lurk Wales app, and it will sit on your phone until you send it to us. So that's the record made. Simple, quick and easy. If you want to check the details, click on the record line, and you can see we've recorded a yew, we've got the grid reference and today's date. In red is name missing. It's always good to add a location name so we can cross-reference that grid reference. So tap on the location line and type in the name of the nearest place, in this case Brecon. Use the back arrow top left to go back to your record, where you can add other information if you wish. Really useful is to add a photo of your records if you can. So bottom left, click on the camera symbol. You can add a photo you've already taken from your gallery, or take one there and then by clicking the camera symbol. Take a photo of your yew tree. Bottom right, click OK to add it to your record and to send it to us. At the moment that record is just sat on the phone. To send it to us, top right, click upload. and that record will move from pending into uploaded and will be available for us to download onto the BIS database.
So that's the app. Really easy to use once you get to know what all the buttons do and where they are. And in that example, I knew I was recording the U tree, so I pressed the plus symbol at the bottom there in the middle. But you can actually make a record in the app just with a photo. So instead of pressing that green symbol with a plus in it, then if I'd have tapped photo, I could have taken a picture of my U tree and it would have made a record just using the photo with the same location details. And then I could have gone home and identified it and then added the name later. So really useful, and it does a lot of the work for you. So the Alert Wales app is, well, we developed it, I suppose, to encourage recording in Wales and to make people feel they were part of the Welsh recording community. Its main difference to the iRecord app is that it is fully bilingual. So if you want to use it totally in the Welsh language, you can do. And where there is a Welsh name for each species, that's in there as well. Although I noticed that not every species, every animal, plant, etc., has an actual Welsh name. So not totally usable in Welsh, but it is fully bilingual other than the species dictionary in total. And it allows you to record offline as well. So you don't need connectivity when you're making records. You just need to enable your GPS, which doesn't need Wi-Fi. So the only time you do need to connect to your Wi-Fi back home or 4 or 5G, for example, if you're out and about, is to submit that record to us. So what I do is I go off for a walk, for example, make lots of records, and then I submit them, giving them a quick check when I get back home and connect to my Wi-Fi. So you can use the Alert Wales app to record in Wales, and if you do use it over in England or Scotland, then you can use it and the records will go to the same place as if you would use the iRecord app. And likewise, you can use the iRecord app anywhere in the UK, including Wales. And as we saw, it makes it really easy to put in the who, what, where, and when. It does a lot of the work for you, but those details are changeable. So for example, if you saw something yesterday, you want to make a record of it in the app, you can change the date to the actual date that you saw it. And with the photo and the location, you need to allow your phone to connect up with your camera and with the GPS as well. So you've got to permit your phone, you've got to permit the app to access your phone's camera and photo library and things like that. So just be careful of those when you first start using it. And to use the app, you don't have to have an account, but to submit or upload records, you do have to be logged in. So you do need to create an account for that as well. You can do that in the menu area, and that will send, so you register an account. It will send you an email just to verify the email address, which you open and click yes or whatever it says, I can't remember now, and then use those login details, your email address and password to log in, and then you're good to go. So that's the app, which is great for ad hoc recording or taking with you on a walk, for example, if you're not really sure what you're going to record. But of course, you're going to be using these recording sheets, which I've seen, and they're really good. And I'm looking forward to seeing how you use them and what you think of them. So this one is, I guess it will be a printed form that you can take out with you and make records the old school way, if you like. So you've got your notebook, you've got your clipboard and sheet, and you're writing down what you've seen. And you've got the columns there, the sort of what, where, who, and when. Now, that's interesting. I've just noticed there's not a date on there. Oh, it's at the top, sorry. Yeah. So this will be a sheet that you use on the day. So you've got the who, what, where, and when there. So that's good. And then you've got places to put extra information as well, such as what the climate was, because that is going to affect what you see, as well as season and other conditions, temperature, for example. And then you've got a note section on the end for adding extra information that might be useful. So that's kind of a paper record, and similar headings on your online data collection instrument. Sounds very grand, doesn't it? So this is something that's been created for you guys, which is really, really good. So this is the butterflies, the Lepidoptera data collection instrument or data recording sheet that you can use online. So you connect up to this with a link and you can add all your records online. So you can write them on paper and add them later, or you can write what you've seen in the notebook. I'm not quite sure exactly how you're going to do it, but this online form is really, really good because all the species that you're likely to see are in the drop-down boxes A and B. So I've just pre-filled these with peacock butterfly. And this is great because it will avoid all the spelling errors that sometimes happen, especially with the species kind of Latin name. So that will do away with those. So this one's for the butterflies, the Lepidoptera. There's also ones for birds and flora, so plants, botany, various names. So they're really, really good. And I've got a question that maybe Rachel or Jenny could answer. And what happens if you find something that's not on the list, and can you write it in? How would you add an unlisted species? So there you go, I've got a question as well. So let's just quickly go through it, and this applies to the written form as well. We only need to know the species or the common name. You can give us both if you like. And in this case, the species name is also, you might know it's a Latin name, or we know it as a scientific name. And they're really, really useful because every different species has a different scientific name, but not every common name is unique. As we've seen with the peacock, butterfly, it could be a bird as well. So you only need to give us one. If you're more familiar with the common names, that's fine, we can use those. The date ideally would be the day, month, and year, but we can just use month or year if that's all the information that you have. Abundance is great, especially if it's a number. So I saw 4 peacock butterflies, but with plants, that's not always possible because they're usually more abundant. So I'm not sure if you've come up with any agreed terms, but our database can cope with most terms. So that's fine to use terms such as loads or many or widespread or something like that. So that's fine, we can cope with that. Translate must be for you to use depending on which translate you're on. I noticed in the chat that someone mentioned what 3 words. So we usually work with grid references, but what 3 words is great because it really pinpoints your location to 3 by 3 meter squares, I think it is. So if you prefer to use what 3 words, that's fine. It might be easier to write a grid reference than the 3 words that make up the what 3 words, but yeah, we can use what 3 words locations and we can convert those to the grid reference that we need. So that's fine. So you can use either or again of those. The observer is basically the recorder, so that's the person that's making the record, i.e. you. So that's what observer means. And determiner is this person that I've been talking about, the verifier, the expert, the specialist that acts as a determiner of your record. Is it likely to be correct or not? As I've said, the more information you can give, the more likely they are to be able to say, yes, that's definitely what you've seen, and that gives that record added value. You don't need to have a determiner, and not a lot of records, maybe more than half of our database of records don't have a determination, so that's fine. They're still there on the database, they still appear in the maps. So you don't actually need to have a determiner, but it does give that record added value. And in the notes section, you can put comments such as behavior, what that animal or bird was doing, the life stage. So in case of a butterfly, was it an adult you saw, or the caterpillar, the egg, the pupa? Birds, you might say whether it was calling or singing. And then for flora, you might put this in the abundance, the extent of it, or you might put whether it was flowering or in seed, that kind of thing. And I guess the notes, the comment used to be the way that verifiers would, determiners would decide whether that record was correct or not. And it's kind of been superseded by the photos, but of course on a spreadsheet you can't add a photo. So any notes you can make be good. And you've also got this species list with the common name and the species name, and you've got this for the birds and the plants as well. And this is a list which appears in those spreadsheets of things you're likely to see. So that should make it a lot easier to record. As I say, I've got that question about what to do if you find something that's not on the lists that you've made. And just going back, I've put in here the scientific species name and the common name, and we only need one, but if you do put two, make sure they are both the same species, because obviously on this you can accidentally put the wrong species name next to the common name. So maybe just use one on the spreadsheet there.
Just to come in on what you said about if you observe something that's not on the list, of course, write it down on the observation sheets if you're using those, and on the spreadsheet you can just delete the cell where that drop down menu is and just pop in the name of the species that is new.
You just delete the right, okay.
Yeah.
Or add it to this form. That's the observation form, is it right? Okay. Excellent, thanks for that. So that's hopefully how you're going to be making your records when you're doing your surveys. And however you make your records, this is what happens to them when you send them to us, upload them or submit them to us. So just to show you the kind of journey that the record makes, it's probably a lot more complicated than this. So you submit your record to us. The experts, if there is one able to see online records in iRecord, they get access to it straight away, so they can see a photo, and then they're able to verify it or get back in touch with you to ask further questions. So that's why we need the name. And we then download those records to our database. It's not a Aderyn, that comes later. So we have our own database that we download all the records, and then we check them and check for duplications and things like that. And then we upload them to Aderyn, which is where you can see them in the What's in My Area tool and where we can make maps from. So each record goes through a little bit of a journey, so it's not instantly appearing on Aderyn when you submit it. So there is a few processes to go through to check that data is accurate. So different methods take different amounts of time, and I suppose the quickest is if you are using the app, as you can make a record and upload it to us straight away, and then it starts going through that process sooner than if you're a counter recorder and you're only submitting your records to us once a year. And here's Aderyn with a web address at the bottom there, and this is where you can use the data that we have, this wildlife records that we have, just to see what's in your area, as I described earlier, and create distribution maps if you're interested in a particular species and where it might be recorded or have been recorded across Wales. In this case, the red kite, which seems to be widespread. This is a little video I made on using the What's in My Area tool, which I think we've got enough time. I'll quickly show it in a couple of minutes. And this is something you can do just to see what's in your area if you live in Wales, of course. Here's the Aderyn homepage and the What's in My Area tool. Click Go. And to search for a particular area of Wales, you can either click on the map or type in your grid reference or postcode. I'm going to click on a random square in the map. It will convert that to a 4-figure grid reference, which is a 1 kilometre square, 1 by 1 kilometre square. Click Go, and it will give a summary of all the different non-sensitive species that have been recorded at 1 kilometre square. We can see in the summary box there's 185 records and 61 different non-sensitive species have been recorded there. There is a list here of sensitive species, and as you can see, that has things like rare birds of prey and bats and some rare plants in amongst other rare species that we don't show on this What's in My Area tool because we don't really want people to know where they are. The list of this 185 records is seen below, and you can have a scroll through that and have a look. And in the search bar here, say you're interested in birds, you can type birds, and it will show that there aren't any bird records, which is a bit of a shame. So that's one place to go and record birds. You can see there's quite a lot of vascular plants and invertebrates. So have a look at that to find out what's living in your area. But yeah, it was interesting. I chose that square that didn't have any bird records. It does look quite a remote square. So maybe you'll find a similar thing in the area that you live. So maybe it'll encourage you to go and record something that you know lives there, but you don't have any records of. So yeah, lots of ways to get involved. Lots of information out there. You can head to our website, bis.org.uk. There's a Get Involved section where we give recording advice, and you can find that ad hoc individual record form where you don't need to register. You can sign up to our BIS Biodiversity Bulletin. You can see the various events, recording days, and ID wildlife identification and awareness events that we have. There's a link to our YouTube channel, and I think in the chat someone mentioned about wildlife cameras. We did a couple of events last year on camera traps, so we got a couple of hour or so long talk there from someone who knows all about camera traps. We've got the beginner's guide and the more advanced one as well, so have a look at those and all the various other YouTube videos that we've got up there. We're on social media, so if you want to connect with us on Twitter, Facebook or Instagram, you can do using those hashtags. Unfortunately, they're all different, but that's nothing I can do about that. And of course, you can record your wildlife sightings, which you'll be doing when you're doing the surveys, but also just generally using the apps or online recording sites. So lots of ways to get involved. And oh, I thought I'd put this in twice, and I have. This is probably the same slide, but this is the updated one actually. There's the BIS Biodiversity Bulletin, the latest one. I've got to do one for May, and I put this little clip in because it was quite interesting. One of our recorders who records birds and moths looked into why a lot of birds are called little and a lot of the moths are called small. So here we have a little egret rather than a small egret, and apparently small is a more affectionate term. So, or maybe it's the other way around, I can't remember. Anyway, so that was quite interesting. So we've got interesting little articles like that in there, and also our events and things like that as well. And of course, the Darien, have a look at what's living in your area too. Here's the leaflet, which you can find on our website. Just gives you brief information and kind of reminders about the app and recording sites and things like that. Social media links. And I've just put together a little quiz, which, well, I'll run through really quickly. Just do it amongst yourself or to yourself. So, how many local environmental record centres are there in Wales? What area does BIS cover? There's a clue at the bottom there. What 4 pieces of information are needed for a biological record? And what is a Darien? And maybe in the chat, if anyone has any answers to this question, I can add them to the list of reasons why you should record wildlife. So that's not the uses of them, it's just why you would want to record wildlife. So have a little think, and there of course are 4. We're the only one without any coastline. There's one in North Wales, West Wales and South East Wales. And of course, we covered Powys and the Brecon Beacons National Park area. And the 4 pieces of information, maybe you'd say 5, or the who, what, where. The location is where you could give 2 bits of information, and the when. That's what we need to make a valid biological record. And a Darien is the online portal, online database that's got all the wildlife records from across Wales. So local environmental record centres work together. We put all those wildlife records on the map, so we've got a Welsh picture, if you like. So I think that's it. And of course, now you can go off and download the app to your phone and register and check your email and verify that and log in and then start lurking and start adding wildlife records and sending them to us, which will be great. So look out for some new names appearing. And this is something that I put for me, but just give a few web addresses of BizWide, which is our online recording site, or iRecord there as well. And just to give you, I won't show this video, running out of time, but this is the iRecord online recording site where you can make records online, or if you do use the apps, you can explore. That's where you would find the records that you've made. So right, I'll stop now. Hope you enjoyed that. I'll come back and hopefully you're all still there. I've not been able to see anybody all talk, which is another swerve ball that Zoom's thrown at me. There's always something with Zoom that you're not expecting, and there you go, all worked smoothly, but I just couldn't see anybody. So if you'd like to ask a question in person, if you want to unmute yourself, I'll do that first, and then I can whiz through the chat. Not too many, so I should be able to go through those. Does anyone have a in-person question and want to unmute themselves and ask?
Yes, I'd like to ask a question about invasive plant species.
Okay, hi Mick. Yes, the Lurk Wales app, or the online recording sites, are the place to do that. So yes, we didn't really cover that in what to record, what not to record, but yeah, definitely do record the invasives, especially in the national park area, because there is a team of people, well, it's only 2, but they've got volunteers that are funded for the last couple of years and hopefully into the future, where they're sort of tackling the invasives. So they're monitoring the records that have made and going to those, or hiring contractors to go in, and they've been particularly successful on some stretches where they're kind of working back up the water courses with Himalayan balsam. So they're trying to find the source of, say, a Himalayan balsam record, which tends to travel downstream as it grows in damp places and water courses. So yeah, definitely do make records of invasive species.
Can I just get a little bit more specific? I realize it's a big area, but is there, so there has to be a borderline between garden escapes and invasive species. Is there a defined list of invasive species?
Ooh, good question. I suspect there is, yes. And I know in the national park they're focusing on Himalayan balsam, Japanese knotweed, and giant hogweed. So they're definitely 3. And then, yes, I'm sure they'll have a list of, I don't know, 50 or so, which are classed as invasive species. And there is an invasive species week, which I think has just gone, or it might be happening now, I can't remember. So there's kind of websites and organizations that are set up to monitor and offer advice and promote recording of it, so that we got an idea, again, like any species, knowing what is where, and then things can be put in place to try and tackle that, because it's a big job. Garden escapees, yeah, botanists hate these because they kind of only want to know the wild plants, but a lot of plants have escaped into garden. Some of these will be classed as that invasive non-native species list of ones that they're interested in, but there are loads and loads of others, such as variegated varieties of a wild species, for example. So I think it is good to record those if they're growing in the wild, and if you know they're a garden escapee, you can add that to the record in the comment or note section.
Oh, that's useful.
Yeah, that would be really helpful. So I'm a volunteer data officer at Stump Up for Trees, and when we analyse the data after the fact, what I can do is find the list of invasive species, and then when we're coming up with our frequencies, charts, etc. on the flora and fauna we've observed, we can look at how many invasive species have been observed. I think that'll be a really interesting subset analysis to add to our report.
Yeah, definitely. And it's like any species, you know, it's good to know what's living where. So yeah, do record them with a kind of note if it's a garden escapee, just to kind of make that clear.
If I could just briefly come in here, would the same thing apply to mammals? So, for example, I volunteer for the Canals Trust, and mink have often been spotted along the canal. Is that something that we would tend to want to report?
Yeah, I would report mink records.
Yeah.
And obviously, if we notice a steep incline, an increase in the number of mink that have been recorded, that gives an indication that they're kind of spreading or growing in population. Yeah. So yeah, that's a good. I might add that to the talk. Actually, that's a good couple of points there. So yeah, do record invasive species. I mean, grey squirrel is the one that we probably have the most of, and basically they're living everywhere. And our local mammal recorder says it's good to record them because he thinks in a few years' time there'll be some kind of scientific way to, you know, like manipulate their populations, that kind of thing. So knowing where the centres of population are will be really useful. So yeah, do record mink, sure. Yeah.
Okay. Thanks for that.
That's okay.
I've put the link to the NRW regulations for the invasive species in the chat, because that lists the 14 key species for Wales, and it also gives a link to the species lists that are kind of maintained by Gov.uk if people are interested in looking at those. So that link is in the chat. Thanks,
Jenny. Yeah, that's great. So yeah, have a look at that website. I'll just see. Yeah, oh yeah, they're not. All right, so 14. So not as many as I thought, but there must be a bigger list to the whole of the UK, I would imagine. Okay, if anyone has any more questions, do come in. I'll just work through the comments and questions. Yeah, what 3 words? Yeah, use that if you like. It does give a really accurate resolution where your record is, and that might be really useful for rare plants. If you find a particular rare plant, knowing exactly where it is enables a recorder, a verifier, an expert to then go and find it as well, because they'd probably be interested in that record as well. So the more accurate you can be with your location, the better. Yeah, the wildlife cameras. Yeah, have a look at the 2 videos on the our YouTube channel, which you'll find from our website. I'll just post our website in the chat, and you find lots of links on there. Let's have a look. Can you make records on the app? Yeah, oh yeah, I answered that one. Yeah, so yeah, you only need the connectivity to download it and to upload the records. Yeah, duplication. We do have systems, don't always work as we saw at the start, that would get rid of duplicated records. But I always say, you know, it's better to have a record of something twice, 3 times than not have it recorded because you thought someone else was recording it, for example. So yeah, do record it more than once. That's the easiest way.
Can I expand on that a bit, Ben?
Yeah.
What I was thinking about in particular was that if we're going out in small teams doing surveys on a day, obviously we're filling in our spreadsheet, and then our spreadsheet's going to get sent off to you. Now, if we are then we don't want to be taking those records on the Lurk app at the same time as we're doing our surveys, if you're going to get that information anyway. But the nice thing about the Lurk app, obviously, is it takes a photo, records it with the photo, whereas our spreadsheet system is the photos are less easy to link together. Any I mean, obviously, I think thinking about it, we'll try and say, if you're recording it in our survey, please don't put it on the Lurk app as well, because it's just creating an unnecessary duplication. But any suggestions on kind of what people do, how we could kind of maintain a little bit of a photo link between our
yeah. Now we've got that opportunity to add photos. It's a shame when we can't.
Shame to lose it.
Yeah. I'd say, obviously, if you're recording things other than plants, birds and butterflies, then put it onto the app. Or you could also add it to that observation form as well as something else. I'd say for the commoner species, maybe you don't need a photo. The photos are kind of used by the verifiers, the experts. They don't actually stay with your record when it goes into a derrin, just because there'd just be too much data in there and it'd just be too big. So yeah, I should have made that point. And when you add a photo to a record, we get that and the verifiers can see it. But once we start processing it, we lose that photo. So you'll always stay in the system with your record. The record doesn't get deleted. So it might be in 20 years, there is a verifier and they decide to look back over historical records. They'll see that photo. They'll say, yeah, that's definitely that. And then our systems will update that information. So it's still useful to put one on. I'd say just for things that either you're not certain of, and then get extra advice, or if you have seen something that's rare or unusual, then the photo will kind of back that up if you like. So yeah, it's a kind of difficult one. There's not a wrong or right answer, it's just maybe what you feel, and if you're kind of doing one method, you might not want to be using the app as well. But I think for anything exciting or rare, then yeah, a photo is helpful. Whereas if it's the more common things and the verifiers are seeing it, then they're probably going to know, they'll know who you are and that kind of thing. So
yeah.
Yeah.
Rachel, if you and I, we might have a think about that and think about, and I might chat to Lou as well and see how we can come up with a way of recording those photos, but then not having to store them online for ages because data storage issues and stuff like that. So I think
Yeah,
we'll
that
think
sounds
about
good. I think that was a good rule of thumb to take the photo if it's something rare, as in it maybe wasn't cited last year or something that person isn't sure about, because there'll be plenty of other people in the group to chat with to verify that photo. But I think we don't need to have like 50 pictures of a wren, different wrens on Bryn Arrow. You know, we can be pretty safe and assured in our observations with those kind of species.
I think it might be worth sort of identifying a list of common things that we don't need a photograph for, would probably be, because otherwise one thing that seems really obvious to one person who's used to seeing them all the time might be another person's unusual bird.
Yeah, that's a good point. What we can do is, and I don't know this from observation, I'm used to surveying people, not flora, fauna and birds, but I've got the data from last year, which gives a ranked list of the most commonly cited to least commonly cited. So I can share the information of the least commonly cited birds, which we could call our rarer ones. And then obviously anything we didn't see last year, we would class as rare or to be confirmed.
Yeah, I think that sounds a good idea. But yeah, when you say you make a record in the app or online, it will go onto the iRecord database. You know, that must be huge because so many people across the UK. So I think they can cope with the data, but it's always a question of, you know, it's only going to get bigger and bigger and bigger. So yeah, I think if it's not on the list, then maybe take a photo, or if you're not sure, definitely take a photo to get help and advice down the line. And yeah, if you want to submit a record that's not a bird, a butterfly, or a plant on the online forms, then yeah, maybe a Lurk Wales app with a photo is good. So yeah, you kind of find the balance. There's not one right answer, and what somebody else might know, somebody else doesn't. So it depends who you are as well and what you know. So yeah, good question though.
Could I ask a question about transects and how they should be used?
I think
if this is the right place to ask that question.
Yeah, that's fine. I think probably not best to answer, but I think there's set transect lines across Bryn Arrow for the different surveys, and that's to kind of make it more standard. So you'll always walk that same transect, so that'll make it easier to see trends. So you're always recording this kind of same distance area, which is kind of a standard technique that you'd use. So I think I think that's right, isn't it? You've got transects for all 3 taxon groups.
Yes, we do, and that's one of the things that the trainers will run through with us. We've got 3 training days with the ecologists who did the surveys last year, and they'll run through where
great.
those are, how to work with them, all of those processes. So, but yes, Mick, that's going to be something we'll all have to work out, but the information will be provided.
It's just standardizing the surveying so it's more relatable as the years go on, you know, standard area covered. And abundance, we did chat a little bit about this. If you can sort of give an area, so maybe you've seen a patch of bird's foot trefoil, you could say, oh yeah, it was a patch 10 meters by 3 meters or something like that, just to give an indication of where it is. So yeah, any information you can give on abundance is good. If it's a bird, you know, you use an actual number because you might only see 1 or 2, but you might see a flock flying over and you might estimate how many you thought there were, that kind of thing. It's just to give added value to that record. And where do you draw the line, not a transect line, to a new record? So yeah, this is a good question. It's like, how often do you record something? I'm not sure if you've got any standards with your transects, because I know with butterfly recording transects, you kind of walk along your transect at a kind of set pace, and then you record any butterflies that you see within a certain meterage of your line, so maybe 5 meters either side of your line. And then I know this is what butterfly conservation do. They put that data into some kind of database, and it takes account of the fact that you might have recorded the same butterfly more than once. So I'm not quite sure what you're doing with your transect, but it might be that if you know it's the same butterfly, you don't record it, but if it could be a new one that's flown the other way, you come across another one, then you would record it. So yeah, good question.
I have another question on gardens and things being planted in a garden or not. So at the beginning, there was one example where it said, you don't record things you've planted, only things that naturally occur. So if you have moved to a place where there's things in the garden where, well, I don't know whether there's been planted before, I don't think they're normally a garden plant. It's probably more considered a weed. But it's like you can't know. And then there was the other example with the app where the person recorded a yew tree in a churchyard, where I would have expected for sure that's been planted there. So why was that recorded?
Oh, good question. Well, I keep my challenge. Yeah, it's a good point. I don't know. I think it's another one of those where there isn't really a right or wrong answer.
I mean, maybe it's because when you think about ancient tree recording, you probably wouldn't, for that, it doesn't matter whether someone planted the tree somewhere or how the tree is just there and that's significant. But it's, yeah, I think I'm also used to more straightforward data. It's very confusing with this type of data to try and make nature fit into data that you can then analyze somehow. I think that's what I'm struggling with right now.
Yeah, no, it's a good point. I mean, I sort of mentioned if you planted a hedge, which you hope will be there in 100 years, when would you start recording it? I mean, you could record, I mean, you can record garden plants and maybe put in the comment garden plant, but we did a recording event during lockdown and we got records of people who recorded runner beans and things like that, which yeah, it's fine, you can do that in the app, it does allow you to, but is that data really very useful? So I guess it's if you think that record is going to be useful in terms of conservation value, maybe is the way to look at it.
Yeah, that's a good guideline.
Yeah, and with the yew tree, you know, it's been there 2, 3 plus 100 numbers of years. So when does it become a natural part of the environment? So Yeah, no, that's a good
Yeah.
point. And again, there's like no right answer. It's like, how often should you record the birds on your bird feeder? You know, there's no right answer. You should do it every day or every week. So yeah, no, it's some good points coming up here. I like it.
That would be a really interesting one to bring up on the flora survey, because obviously we're surveying a site where we've planted all the trees. So, but if we don't include them, then in that kind of when all of the other wildlife has changed and somebody walks up there and like, wait, this is in the middle of a woodland, what the hell's going on? That wouldn't make any sense. So it'd be really interesting to talk to the ecologist when we do the flora survey.
Yeah, definitely.
What she suggests about that.
Yeah, that would be interesting. Who have you got? Who's your ecologist? Oh, it's not the plant person, is it? It's not the plant recorder for.
No, a lady called Ali Wheeler who did the survey for us last year and works in a lot of kind of the woodland areas in Wales. So,
and again, you'll have that human element in someone will be like, oh yes, you should record them, and someone will be like, no, you shouldn't. So I think on Bryn Arrow you should record them, and maybe because we did the ancient tree walk there as well. Of course, there's a lot of ancient trees and veteran trees up there as well. So yeah, there's a kind of mixture. So maybe for those you would put a planted hedge or planted trees or something like that, and then that would go with the record. So those, I say photos don't go into a Darren, but any comments or notes you may do. So they are really useful in terms of that. So yeah, if someone was looking, they could see that all these trees were planted 50 years ago, and there'd be a kind of record of that, which would be useful.
Well, on that point, it might also be interesting to see how particular trees evolve and what type of succession we get over a period of time.
Yeah, you might find that you planted 10% of every species, and then in 20 years one is doing better than the other. So yeah, I don't know whether you might do a planted tree survey or it will just become part of general surveying. So yeah, that's another interesting one.
Can I just ask, do you never use audio, particularly for bird verification? I've just looked on the app and there's no, you can only put a photo in. You can't.
Yeah, you can't put video or no. But what you can do, and I've done this, is you can record or you make a video, and then if you can send that to an expert or your county recorder. So for example, I made a recording a few years ago of a bird call, which turned out to be a sparrowhawk, I think. I didn't see it, I just heard it and thought, oh, that sounds interesting. And then I emailed it to Andy King, who's the local bird recorder, and he listened to it and told me what it was. So at the moment, you can't attach that sort of thing to records, because I guess just the file size would start to eat into all that data handling issues that we talked about with videos and things. There might be apps I know there used to be a grasshopper app where you could record a grasshopper sound, and they're quite distinctive between different species, and then attach it to your record, and that would allow the grasshopper recording scheme to hear the recording of your grasshopper with your record, and I guess verify it that way. So, but I don't think that's available now, so it's probably technology gone too far, and then of course somebody's got to listen to that and make a record, and this now more and more records are being made. It's becoming harder and harder to verify them all, to check them all, because the amount of records is increasing and the amount of experts isn't kind of matching that. So yeah, there are ways, and if you're on social media, there'll be recording groups or identification groups like the UK Beetles UK and Ireland, where you would be able to put a recording up there, I think, or a video, and then somebody on there will be able to give you an identification. But at the moment, no, it's just photos that you can add. And you can add more than one photo to your record. on the app and online, so you don't just have to try and get one good photo. For some species, you get a range of angles as well. So I guess that's another point. If you're photographing something you're not too sure about, especially with plants, try and get different angles of the leaves, for example, the flower, that kind of thing.
Can I ask a question about expertise then and verification?
Yeah, sure.
Do you think there's potential for stump in like people who have more specialist knowledge to become verifiers that would be sort of like, what is the official accreditation process for that happening? So I was thinking about the discrepancy between the number of things recorded on Bryn Arrow versus the ones that have been officially verified, and the likelihood and the sort of limitations on the resources that you've got for people who are allowed to do that verification. The work that I do looking at radiological citizen science, generally citizen knowledge is kind of like subjugated to professional scientists who possibly might have less knowledge about the local species of flora and fauna than some of the local people who might be recording this data. And so I wondered whether there might be an opportunity for some of the particular sites which we will come to possibly be the experts for that particular area and will know it better than anybody else, that there might be a potential for somebody from Stump or a number of people to actually, for us to do that internally.
Yeah, that's a very good point. I mean, I've found out that there's no set way how you become a verifier or an expert. So there's no set process. And there's a conference happening at the moment, the National Federation of Biological Recording, and there was a really interesting talk from a project, I can't remember where it was now, but they were talking about butterflies, and they had this scheme where they were training up local people involved in recording in that area to recognize or being officially accredited, if you like, not sure how they were doing it, in a certain group of butterflies, so maybe the really common ones. So they were getting training just to make sure that they could identify peacock, red admiral, painted lady, small tortoiseshell, brimstone, that kind of thing. And then they would then become official verifiers or experts for those particular species, and they'd be able to verify it. I'm not sure how that all came about, I can't remember now, but I know in Breconshire, the verifier, the expert, is kind of divvied out. I think this is happening with moths as well. It's kind of got a group of people now, rather than just one person having to try and do it all. There's a group of people and they say, yeah, I know this particular set of species. So any records of those species will go to, or he'll see them and he'll be able to tick them off or ask a question or say, no, that's not that particular species, it's this one, for example. So that is in process, but there's no set way. A lot of it is, I guess, on knowing who the person is. So we have had new verifiers, counter recorders on our list added to our list over the last few years, and that's just people that have been suggested by another counter recorder, or there might be a member. For example, we've got bee recorders, 2 new bee recorders for the whole of Powys, which is split into the smaller vice counties of Montgomeryshire, Radnorshire and Breconshire, and they're part of Bee Wars, the Bees, Wasps and Ants Society. So they've kind of got that knowledge and linked to an organisation, and yeah, there's no set way how you do it. So
if we were relatively sure about something, then how do we get a verifier to additionally be really sure? That seems to be really unclear. But also I am excited about the potential. I could see that there's a potential for Stump to sort of set up its, if there is no official system, we can make our own effectively internally that helps us validate some of our data that could be added to all of our records potentially, where Stump could say, actually, part of the training could be that these 25 or the 75 most common species that you do, part of your training is testing you on doing that. And I mean, I did something similar for some like tropical fish monitoring in Madagascar like 15 years ago, where we were tested to make sure you went out with somebody, would point at something and say, what is that? And they would spend an hour with you and would confirm that you were actually capable of identifying things. And then at the end of that, you were then sort of like signed off for sort of officially verifying certain things, but you wouldn't necessarily for this weird one that you wouldn't come across very often. And I wonder if that's something that we might be able to look at, that sort of basically helps us make better quality data, that presumably you have that verified notification for some kind of purpose, and therefore the data that achieves that tick gets signified in somebody's database as being better data. So we want all of our data to be really good quality data, and there's no reason why we can't develop systems that can help that be the case in a way that isn't really labor intensive for some other poor bugger who's the only one verifier and has got to walk like 500 different sightings on Green Arrow twice a month.
I think this might be a conversation that we should definitely we should definitely take offline, Lou, and have a think about how we can set. And Ben, would you be happy if we kind of have a conversation about this, if we can kind of bring you in to
sure,
on and advise
I think
how
that
we might go about this?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, it's kind of another subject. I mean, it's a massive thing, data flow.
Yeah.
But I think the way forward is to, rather than one person doing everything, is to split groups of species up amongst people. And I think the good starting point is trying to work with the local expert or verifier, if there is one for that particular group in the area. And then, because just to quickly, when we get the records, we kind of have a list of who the county recorders are or national experts, and if they've said they're the determiner, then we'll kind of give that an extra tick. Whereas if we're not aware of them, yeah, you know, I've recorded things and I know what it is, and I know that is what it is, but it hasn't been verified because there isn't anybody doing it. So some of that might be that there isn't a verifier. And then I've put people's names, but it's not a recognized name that has helped me identify it. So it doesn't it's all about that data accuracy. So, but yeah, it is a whole new subject, and it is something that is kind of coming on board now with thinking and trying to get more people verified and trained. But yeah, definitely something to think about, and bring Jo in as well, our data officer who we saw. She knows more about the data side of things than I do. So yeah, Sheila said there are county recorders for all the major groups, but not one for every record, every group. So, and some are local and some are national as well. So some of your records will be seen at a national level on iRecord, and there'll be somebody somewhere in England will verify your record from a photo, for example. It doesn't always have to be the local person. Okay, internal validation is definitely the way to go. Yeah, if we know who it is that's doing it, then I mean, if you send your records to the county recorder, if there is one, they'll look at them, and they often do it in batches. And yeah, there's various ways that records get verified, and it's very complex.
I think we'll have a chat about this as a
team, definitely.
And work out what our best steps are. Yeah,
that'd be good, because you're going to get a lot of information, data, records, and it'd be good if a lot of them can be verified, get some added value. So
yeah, I think the data quality is really important to us, and this is a long-term survey as well. It's really important to demonstrating the efficacy of the whole project. We hope that planting trees will change biodiversity and that we'll see new species in the area. So fundamental to that is having good quality data to demonstrate those changes and increases over time. So it sounds like we've got some good options for this year, making use of the existing network with the county recorders. And as a team, we can do that work after the data's been collected, reach out to them, ask for the verification. And then I think over the next year and longer term, we can work on some of those internal validation processes, because it's just going to be less resource intensive, as you say, and we can be a little bit more independent then with doing our validation.
Yeah, okay, yeah, that sounds good. Excellent. So further work needed. But no, that's great. Yeah, some good questions there. Thanks for those. I think we'll wind up now and call it a day. I have recorded it. What I'll do is I won't edit it because that takes time, but I'll put it on our YouTube channel, but make it private. So only if you have the link can you see it.
Brilliant.
So rather than everybody, because we have got similar talks on wildlife recording on our channel, which you could watch. But for this one, we can spread it widely if you like. But yeah, you try to give you the link and then you can email it to all your stump up the
Brilliant.
and they can watch it.
That's fantastic, Ben. It's been a brilliant evening, and thank you ever so much for your time today.
Oh, you're welcome. It was a pleasure. Yeah, I enjoyed it, and yeah, it was nice to get some good challenging questions, because it does make you think. And yeah, it's always the future you're thinking of, and what's going to happen with all this data, and how can it be made better, and that sort of thing. And yeah, a lot of the time there's no right or wrong answer. So yeah, go out and record wildlife. That's all I can say, really. And yeah, good luck with the surveying. Okay, thanks everyone. Nice to see you all, and enjoy the rest of the night. Cheers.
Thank you, Ben.
Thank you very much.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Take care.
Bye.
Cheers.
Um,
You can ask.